In 2014, director Clint Eastwood and star Bradley Cooper gave the world a brutal introspection into the eternal cost of war.
In 2024, Brad, we get to try our favorite brand once again.
A very expensive version of it. The film is American Sniper.
The whiskey is Rebel Single Barrel 10-Year Bourbon.
And we'll review them both. This is
The Film and Whiskey Podcast. Welcome to the Film and Whiskey Podcast, where each week we review a classic movie and a glass of whiskey. I'm Bob Book.
I'm Brad G.
And this week we are in 2014 to look at the highest grossing film of that year, Clint Eastwood's American Sniper.
Bob, Clint Eastwood is just the wildest of directors. Because I don't know if we have many directors who have, A, starred in a bunch of movies, starred in television shows, became a director, he's probably directed like 40 films. And like 32 of them are average to bad, and 8 of them are like, I don't know, is this going to be a best picture for the year?
Yeah. I mean, listen, he's batting 250. Like that's an acceptable batting average in the major league.
100%, man. And dare I say it, I think American Sniper might be my favorite of his films that we've watched.
I've been interested to hear what's going to come out of this episode, Brad. So let me give a little bit of context. About a year ago, we were in one of our director-based seasons where we were watching 4 to 5 films from a director to try to get a sense of who they are, what they thematically like to make movies about. And Clint Eastwood was one of those directors. And at the time, we looked at Unforgiven, Mystic River. We revisited $1 Million Baby for our patrons. What else did we watch from Clint Eastwood at the time, Brad?
Oh, man. I can't remember right now. We've watched a lot of Clint Eastwood films, Bob.
Yeah, we sure have. And Eastwood's an interesting director because in our very charged political times, I think people have really started, especially people on the left, have really started to criticize Clint Eastwood. And I think in a really reductionistic way. They see him as a conservative director, even though his films don't always follow suit with that. Gran Torino was one of the films we watched, Brad. And I think if any movie is ever going to label Clint Eastwood as like a black and white sort of, conservative, it would be Gran Torino. And I think it's unfair to Eastwood, though, to suggest that he's not dealing with much murkier waters and that he's not implicating both sides of the aisle in a lot of his films. And this is no exception. And I think this movie, I wanted to wait until we got to this season to talk about American Sniper because it deserves its own conversation. As Eastwood got older and people started lobbing these really easy to throw, you are conservative, so therefore you are bad takes. I think this movie really became the victim of that. And that's not really what this movie's A, about at all. And B, I think it's a really bad faith reading of the movie to assume the portrayal of what happened to one soldier, therefore, is A, what Clint Eastwood thinks about war, or B, is an endorsement of war for the sake of war. Like, it's just a really, really awful reading of this movie. And I wanted to get it out of the way now because I frankly think it's a waste of time to debate it. I just reject that premise altogether. This is a much more complicated and nuanced movie than that. And while it is a flawed movie, I think, there are better conversations to have than that one.
100%. I think that any time you walk into something that someone has produced and created, and you've heard that they are X and you're Y, therefore I'm going to find the worst possible reading of this film, that's just boring. I don't know, man. Sure, people can do that if they want. It's America. This is a free country. I would rather have a conversation about how Clint has created here what I would say is a very nuanced understanding of what it means to be an American at war in the 21st century.
I think there's going to be a lot of comparison films brought up today, Brad, because as I was watching this movie, I'm thinking of films we've done on the show that I want to draw comparisons to. But before we get into all that, let me set the stage here. So if you're new to the show, welcome into Film and Whiskey. The premise is right there in the title. We talk about movies, we drink whiskey. This season, what we're doing is we're looking at the highest grossing films of each calendar year from 1988 to 2019. American Sniper was perhaps among the biggest box office surprises of any film we're going to be talking about this season. It is far and away the most financially successful Clint Eastwood film. It's kind of a weird asterisk year for us, Brad, because this movie, while a quote-unquote 2014 film, it premiered in 4 theaters in 2014, and it didn't go nationwide until mid-January of 2015. So when I was looking at like the highest grossing in calendar year releases, it was actually like one of the Hunger Games movies. And then it said like, well, by March of 2015, American Sniper had overtaken it. And it's like, yeah, but it made all of its money in a completely different year.
Yes.
So like, I hate how Hollywood does that. Please know, I understand, Film and Whiskey Nation, that you probably saw this movie in 2015, but you know, too bad. We're talking about it today.
Yeah. And I'm really glad we are, Bob, because this is an excellent movie that is worth talking about.
Mm-hmm. I do think that the fact that this movie made $500 million is kind of staggering.
It's wild, man.
It's the highest grossing war film of all time. Adjusted for inflation, I think it's the second highest grossing war movie of all time. It is one of the 7, I think, movies at the time that was an R-rated film to earn $500 million worldwide. And I already said it's Eastwood's most successful movie. And because of that, you know, people were expecting, okay, maybe this movie, it came out on MLK weekend. It was a long weekend in January where no one usually goes to the movies. Maybe with the star power of Bradley Cooper and the excellent marketing campaign, this will earn a couple $100 million. And it went freaking bananas, dude. I remember it was the year we moved to Kentucky. I went to the movie theater that weekend to see something else. And I walked into the lobby and they had set up one of those like velvet rope, like snake things, because the line inside the lobby to buy tickets was so long. And everybody was going to see American Sniper. It was freaking nuts. I'd never seen anything like it before. This movie was an absolute phenomenon in the worst months of the year, usually, for movies.
Yeah. So did you end up seeing it?
I waited a week because I didn't want to deal with crowds. I'm just like, I'm not that guy right now. Like, but yeah, I saw it in the theater. It's, you know, and I remember even in the build up to it, it had one of the best trailers for a movie that I had seen in years. It was basically just that scene of him up on the roof looking at the mom and kid who have the grenade.
Oh,
and they just play it out like a full 3 minutes of just an uninterrupted scene, basically. And that's the trailer for the movie. It was suspenseful as hell. And it worked like crazy because it got people in the theaters.
Man, the moment, I know we haven't even done Brad Explains, but the moment when he's back in the barracks and his buddies are trying to like be like, hey man, it's no big deal. Like, you popped your cherry. It's okay. Like, doesn't matter how. And they zoom in on Bradley Cooper's face. And I don't remember the exact line, but he essentially goes like, I didn't think it would be like this.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I already liked Bradley Cooper as an actor. That was the moment for me where I was like, oh, damn.
Yeah.
Like, Bradley Cooper's got some chops.
Well, we're going to talk about that in detail because this is his movie through and through. But before we get there, let's go to our first segment of the day, which we call Brad Explains.
Brad's gonna give us the movie plot with only 60 seconds ticking on the clock. So let's go ahead and hear your take with this little segment that we call Brad Explains.
Brad Explains is the part of the show where Brad breaks down the plot of the movie that he has just seen, often for the first time. Brad, how many times have you seen American Sniper?
One.
Oh, this was the first time. Wow. Okay.
This is a first timer for me. Yeah, it's one of those movies that, like, my brother was in the military in the late 2000s, never went to Iraq, but it always kind of hung over us if he would go or not.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember him seeing it and being a big fan of it. And he gave me the book. I never got around to reading it. And so it's always been kind of on the radar. But, you know, life happens and it's 10 years later and I finally sat down to watch this film.
All right, man. Well, I think you just wrapped up watching it a couple hours ago, too. So your thoughts are pretty fresh. Let's dive right in. Brad, you have 60 seconds on the clock to break down the plot of the film with full spoilers. So, folks, if you haven't seen American Sniper and you don't want it spoiled for you, hit pause here, go watch the movie, and then come back and join us again. Brad, 1 minute and go.
American Sniper is a biopic film about the Navy SEAL Chris Kyle, who was a sniper during the Iraq War of the late 2000s. It follows him as he joins the SEALs, goes through training, falls in love with his wife Taya, and eventually goes to Iraq 4 separate times, has 2 children, and kills a lot of people. It pits him against a Syrian sniper who is killing U.S. troops, and ends with him back in the U.S. and trying to care for other veterans and find his own peace in the midst of that, and ends up being killed by one of the veterans who has mental trauma.
All right, there it is, American Sniper. Now, Brad, this is, as with most military films that are set in the modern day, there's just some difficulty inherently folded into it when you want to critique a film. Because, again, we live in politically charged times, but we also live in a time where, the mantra is we need to support our troops. And you and I have kind of discussed this already in a lot of our episodes. Like, what does it mean to support the troops? Does it mean inherently automatically approving of everything that they do? I don't think that's the case, and I don't think you do either. But I think this movie unfairly suffered for Eastwood honestly portraying both the acts of heroism that Chris Kyle did, and he does it very matter of factly and frankly. Like, there is no big celebration of him, and all throughout the movie, he's like, "Oh yeah, I do. I have that many kills. All right, cool." And it's so frank and so matter of fact that I think it rubbed some people the wrong way. Again, I think there's unfairness in how it's treated. But Eastwood basically just portraying Chris Kyle as a guy who does his job garnered a lot of criticism. And I guess I just want to start today by asking you, like, when you think about the other movies that we've talked about that fall into this camp, and I think the main one would be Saving Private Ryan, where we talked a lot about Spielberg getting accused of being jingoistic and, the rah-rah patriotism. And I've never seen that film that way. I think that he just says, like, these are guys that were there to do a job. They did a job. And if nothing else, we need to appreciate the fact that they did what they were asked to do. And I think that's kind of what's going on here with Eastwood. But I think Eastwood honestly probably, what's the word? Not, interrogates Chris Kyle's motives more than Spielberg interrogates the motives in Saving Private Ryan. And yet he gets even less credit for doing that. So, I'm wondering, Brad, like, taken as a whole, what do you think Eastwood's trying to say with this movie?
I think that as the movie ended, and I'll be honest with you, Bob, I did not know that he passed away. I had, like, the ending was truly a twist for me. I mean, the moment, the wife looks at him, Taya, and, like, you see her, you're just kind of like, well, crap.
Yep.
This isn't good. But it kind of hit me like a freaking freight train, man. And I think the thought that popped into my head was that Clint seems to have this deep and abiding respect for the U.S. military in one hand, and in the other hand, he holds the belief that war and violence will cost you everything.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And he holds those two things in tension, where he recognizes that there's evil in the world and we have to fight it, and in the act of fighting it, you will lose everything, up to and including your life.
Mm-hmm.
And that is one of the most brutal tensions that I don't think many of us are willing to face.
And I think that's exactly, man, I think we could just end the episode. I think you summarized it perfectly. And Eastwood, to his credit, leaves you in that tension. And so your reaction to this movie in my opinion, is totally based on what side of that camp you fall on in regards to that tension. Because Eastwood doesn't take a side. And so I think that both the criticisms of this film and the celebrations of this film say a lot more about the people watching the movie than the people that made the movie. You said that he holds a respect for the military in one hand and the belief that violence and war will cost you everything. I think that is a perfect summary, Brad, because it does cost Kyle everything. And it reminds me so much of Unforgiven. I think if there's a movie that I'm going to compare this to throughout the day, it's going to be Unforgiven, because that's the one where he's really interrogating something to the same extent that he does here. And in that movie, it's much more about the mythos of the Old West and the idea of the quote unquote being a legend and what that does to a person. And that kind of happens here. Like, they call him the legend all through the movie.
Mm-hmm.
But whereas Unforgiven is about this legendary outlaw and having to embrace this moniker of being like the angel of death, this one is much more about the same sort of burden, but on the opposite side of the coin. What does it mean to deal with being a hero? What does it mean when someone comes up to you and says, "You saved my life"? How do you handle that burden? How can you ever live up to that legend? But also, when you are considered a hero, you're looked at as if you've got it all together. And this guy clearly does not for the entire film. And I think that's the most interesting part of this movie, is that it's not shitting on what he did, but it's asking honest, true questions about the guy that is considered the biggest hero is the guy no one checks in on throughout the movie.
Yep.
And I think if it's interrogating anything, it's interrogating the people around him. It's interrogating himself and why his coping mechanism is just to go do more heroic things to kind of paper over what is really going on inside. I found this movie incredibly fascinating. I don't think that it's critical of Kyle's actions on the battlefield, but it doesn't get enough credit for investigating and interrogating what's going on in his mind. And frankly, Brad, like a lot of biopics that are made by people on the political left about their heroes don't go this far into questioning motives. And I think Eastwood really deserves more credit than he gets for that.
Well, and in the midst of that, there's no commentary on whether or not they should be at war.
Mm-hmm.
Like throughout the movie, the people who are depicted as evil are depicted as evil for their actions in the midst of war.
Mm-hmm.
And continually, Kyle is portrayed as somebody who defends his men.
Mm-hmm.
And he's given that motivation of like, I don't get jazzed about killing people. I get jazzed about defending people.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that there is an element of importance to that. And at the end of the film, it leaves you with this question of, was it all worth it?
Mm-hmm.
And that for me is a question that all of us should be facing. Like in the midst of war, in the midst of home life, Kyle continually had this element of like, I want to defend my family, and his family extended to veterans who have come back from the war, and he cared for them and tried to help them deal with their own things. And I think in the midst of that, you see Eastwood struggling with this reality of war and violence and brokenness,
mm-hmm.
and how it affects the human soul. And it interrogates Kyle to say, hey, like, was it all worth it?
Mm-hmm.
And when somebody dies early, I just love the moment where she looks at him and says, like, I'm so proud of you. You've done so much to become the man that I've always known that you are. And the brutality of the ending then just, it forces you to reckon with like the journey.
Yeah. I do think that if there is a part of the movie that I want to focus on for an extended period of time, it is that ending. So if it's okay with you, let's set the ending aside for just a little bit, because I think we'll come back to it and discuss it more in depth. One of the things I love about both the script and the way Eastwood portrays this character of Kyle is that it has a very like 1970s character study vibe to it. You know, we used to get movies about characters that were big flawed people And there wasn't often comment on if their flaws are supposed to be interpreted as good or bad. They just were. They were people who just were. And you would go to the movies and be presented with complex people. I think about movies like One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, right? Like Jack Nicholson in that movie is a guy who I think is being sent to the, what do you call it? I almost said loony bin. That's incredibly offensive, but there you go. Because of, I think he's a rapist in that movie. Like your protagonist is a guy who's convicted of rape. And in this movie, you get Chris Kyle, and I don't want to draw the comparison between those actions, but what I'm saying is we're in an era of movie making now where audiences on both sides of the political divide need to be spoon-fed. Like, this guy is bad. This guy is good. And we're going to tell you out loud, this is good and this is bad. This movie's not interested in that. And I appreciate that so much more. Whether that leads to some bad faith readings or not, I'd rather have it this way than the other way. But what I love about the portrayal of Chris Kyle is that from the get-go, he is not a perfect person. Like, he clearly has no capability of discussing his emotions. You get a flashback to this pivotal moment where his dad kind of gives him his mantra. And I think that you can interpret that scene as like, oh, that f***ed him up for life, or like that implanted a seed of heroic behavior, or both. You know what I mean? Like, I think it's kind of both happening. I love the fact that the first time he gets an idea to join the military, what's he doing? He got dumped by his girlfriend, or he dumped his girlfriend, and he has gotten absolutely hammered sitting and watching TV with his brother. And he's angry about what happened with his girlfriend, and he's drunk. And in that moment, he decides to join the military. Like, Eastwood is not, blinking a red alert sign that, like, this is not the state of mind he should be in to join the military, but it's presented as this is how it happened. Interpret it for yourself. And I appreciate that, because it is possible for a person to both do really good things and to have severe character flaws. And Chris Kyle seems like that kind of person who, I don't want to say that like his work with veterans was in any way a character flaw. But he clearly also had some stuff going on psychologically that he needed to deal with that is presented just as frankly throughout this film. I guess what I'm saying in a really long-winded way, Brad, is I like that Eastwood is not using kid gloves here, and that like a lot of it is just laid out as kind of like unstructured data, and you piece it together to make meaning out of it as you see fit, viewer of this film.
Yeah, and even in the way that the girlfriend treats him at the start of the film, like there's a layered nuance to that where what she accuses him of is true. And that doesn't excuse her actions, but he reckons with the fact that, like, she's right. I treat her like garbage. I leave her at home. I go do all these things. Like, who does that make me as a person? And I think that that's kind of where the military catches a lot of their recruits.
Yeah.
Is in young people who are asking themselves, who am I? And what am I about? Do I have a purpose in this life? And the military provides that with so many people. And I think that's why this movie is so successful, in that it portrays the entire arc of, I don't know who I am. The military gave me an identity. Who am I if the military is not my identity? And it follows that entire arc. And I think for the first time, I've watched a Clint Eastwood movie and said, like, I think Clint actually has some nuance in his bones. Because like that, like, what is our one critique of Eastwood constantly, Bob?
Oh, like, I mean, it's not even just that he has no nuance. It's that he finds actors who have no nuance too. Like, just to double down on, like, do you get what I'm trying to say about poor people in $1 Million Baby?
Yep, exactly. Yeah. And so I think that here you finally have multiple actors and characters as they are written that have a depth of character and nuance to who they are. And even the side characters, the guy in the tire shop who tells the kid, "Hey, your dad's a hero." Like there doesn't need to be any nuance there. He's just a character for 1 minute in the film. But there's a depth to that little C-tier performance that felt authentic and real. and it allowed Cooper to play off of it, and it gave Cooper a chance to shine and to flex his acting muscles in acting awkward and uncomfortable and like, okay, yeah, thanks, man. Yeah, cool. I'll just go pay the lady now. Like, that was one of my favorite scenes of the film, and it's not because he was being honored. It's because you can feel the discomfort of, like, what is going on in Cooper's soul.
Mm-hmm. So that actor in that scene is actually Jonathan Groff, who just recently won his first Tony. He's a very esteemed theater actor who has also done quite a few films and television shows. And we just talked about him last week because he was the voice of Kristoff in Frozen. So here he is.
Oh, my goodness.
Showing up again. And
wow.
I think that's actually a really good segue into finding something redemptive about the movie Frozen, because we spent a long time talking about that song Let It Go last week and how it is severely misinterpreted and misused due to its placement in that movie, because Elsa gets really messed up by her parents. She has some really unhealthy coping mechanisms wherein she sings Let It Go. And then the end of the movie essentially undoes that mindset of Let It Go, where she actually experiences healthy community and processing through her trauma. And I think this movie actually follows a pretty similar pattern to that, Brad. Like, I don't think that Eastwood is 100% endorsing the way that Chris Kyle continually returns to Iraq as a way of papering over. And I think, again, that's where people continue to misinterpret this movie. But on the comparative front, if there's another movie that this is obviously a comparison point to, it's The Hurt Locker. It's a movie we talked about a lot last year, Brad.
I thought you were going to say Frozen.
That's my let's make it a double today.
The comparisons are obvious.
With The Hurt Locker, it's a movie that seems to get the benefit of the doubt. And I actually, my scorching hot take is that I think this is a better movie than The Hurt Locker. And I always have.
Yes.
I just think it's a much better produced movie. I think it actually communicates its point just as well, with more nuance than The Hurt Locker. And I also think Bradley Cooper is a better actor than Jeremy Renner. So there you go. But it's funny to me that with The Hurt Locker, which follows almost the exact same pattern as this film, that movie seems to get the benefit of the doubt, and this movie does not. Especially when you have Chris Kyle following that sort of Elsa Let It Go arc here.
If there's one thing I didn't expect coming into this episode, it was that we would be comparing Chris Kyle to Elsa from Frozen.
I mean, look, they both shoot people in the heart. Like, this is, the comparisons are never ending, Brad.
Look at that. I mean, Elsa doesn't shoot children in the heart, so.
She shot her child sister in the head.
That's true.
Headshots, dude. She's more vicious than Chris Kyle.
Oh my goodness.
Okay, listen, we're in a spot right now where we have not really talked about the film. We've talked about what the film means. I think that we need to take a break. Let's talk about the performance of Bradley Cooper after the break. Let's talk about what we actually liked in the filmmaking itself. But before that, I'm really, really anxious. Not anxious. I'm really, really antsy to get to try this Rebel 10, Brad. Let's get to whiskey, if that's okay with you.
I am so ready, Bob. Let's get to it.
All right, today we are checking out Rebel 10-year Single Barrel Bourbon. This is a new release from Lux Row Distillers. I think this is like our third or fourth week in a row, Brad, of doing new release whiskeys on Film and Whiskey. I kind of like it.
It's a wild time.
Yeah, I kind of like it, man.
I've been enjoying it.
Now, as Brad said, this is one of their more expensive offerings. It's because it's a single barrel and it's 10 years old. You know, we've established the principle of $10 per year of aging that our friend Wes tells us about all the time. This is $100 at 10 years. So it seems like, at least in terms of the market, this is priced right where it should be. Again, this is a wheated bourbon. We've talked about Rebel a ton. Rebel Distillers Collection is one of our favorites. Rebel 100 is one of our favorite budget bourbons. This one is bottled at 100 proof, Brad. So we're talking about a 10-year single barrel version of that Rebel 100. I'm freaking pumped, man. And I have to ask you, have you had it already, or are you drinking it live?
Oh, dude, I cracked this bad boy open immediately. I was so excited about this. And not to spoil all my takes, but I'm excited to review it with you, Bob.
I'm drinking it live. I've been holding onto the bottle for a little over a week now, so you can understand why I'm so excited. Brad, I've just poured it out. I'm going to get into my nosing here as you give your notes. So why don't you lead us off?
I think this is a really solid nose. There's caramel right off the bat. There is a really nice soft oakiness to this, which is making me excited. There is some nuttiness. It's very peanutty in my mind. And the longer I sat with it, the more I got some interesting kind of fruity notes that I finally labeled as pineapple. But I don't know. There's this, it's not quite citrusy. It's not quite appley. There's just some sort of really nice, sweet, fruity notes that I'm enjoying. I give it an 8.5 out of 10 here.
I think I'm going to be almost in the exact same place score-wise as you. Caramel dominates on the nose. And, they have tasting notes printed in their little press release. I disagree with them, frankly. Like, I don't get as much vanilla as they said I was going to get. It really is like almost caramel cheesecake at first. I think that as those fruit notes start to come out, Brad, they came out a little bit more like peach for me than they did pineapple. But it does remind me of sort of like an upside down cake. Like there's that sort of caramelized drizzle on top. There's a little bit of breadiness. I don't know if they make peach upside down cakes, but that's what I'm going with here. As it sat, and it's been sitting in my glass for a little over 10 minutes now, there's a note that I'm glad you didn't pick up on because I think it would have lowered your nosing score. Once those all dissipated, it is like straight black licorice to me, and almost like a powdery sort of black licorice, like it's a Good and Plenty or something. And I love Good and Plenty's, and I like black licorice, so I'm on board, dude. I'm giving it an 8.5 on the nose.
Dude, I need to pour some more because I did not get any anise on this.
And like I said, I'm very glad you didn't, because
you know what's a whiskey that I actually got black licorice notes on after drinking it for a while, and I used to really love it, and I still like it. I still think it's a good one. The Sexton.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, after drinking it for a while, I was like, man, this just has black licorice notes on the nose, not on the palate, not on the finish. Anyways, the palate here, it turns into a really nice dark cherry for me. There's oakiness all throughout. There's a burnt caramel vibe, a bit of like a sauteed butter. Vanilla is coming through on the palate, much more so than the nose. I think that this is a really solid expression of Rebel. I'm at an 8 out of 10 on the palate.
Yeah, I think solid is the word here, Brad. It's a little bit thin on the mouthfeel, which I wasn't expecting. Definitely still packs a punch. Like that 100 proof is coming out, but it almost has like a pepper spice to it. There's the burn from the ethanol, as well as almost like some cayenne pepper on the back of my palate here. Oak definitely dominates. You're absolutely right there. It's oak and wheat, and there's not a lot of nuance to it, which is unfortunate because I think like the Rebel Distillers collection has quite a few more waves of like sweet notes and things going on. In my mind, I'm kind of comparing this, Brad, to a bottle that we bought at the Kentucky Bourbon Festival last year, that Lux Row 4-grain, which I think is probably a little bit better than this. I think there's definitely more nuance and complexity to that whiskey. This one's just kind of like a very above average notes of anise, wheat and oak flavored bourbon. So it's going to be a 7.5 for me on the taste. And I'm curious to hear if it improved or kind of fell off for you on the finish.
I actually liked it on the finish a little more than the palate. The cherry stuck through strong to the end. The vanilla really rounded out the experience for me, and the nice dusty peanut vibe just stuck around for the finish. I was at an 8.5 here, and I think overall this is a pretty well balanced whiskey. It's an 8 out of 10 for me on balance. It has just enough complexity to move it into that upper echelon, the 8 out of 10 area. I just wish there was a little more going on here that it could hang its hat on. Yeah,
I'm going to give it a 7.5 on the finish. I think you're pretty much right. The vanilla comes back and it's really appreciated. I'll give it an 8 on balance. I was kind of waffling between a 7.5 and an 8, but overall, this is a well above average whiskey, and there weren't any like significant dips. So I'll give it an 8. When it comes to value, again, we're talking about a $100 bottle of whiskey. This might be the first time that I think a bottle of Rebel is overpriced. based on the whiskey itself. I do think it's a fair market value here. If you're a fan of the Rebel line like I am, I would still probably give it like between a 6.5 and a 7 out of 10 on value. I don't really see myself personally going back and buying another bottle of this one, Brad, especially when I can still get Distiller's Collection for like half the price. So I'll give it a 6.5 here.
Yeah, I am literally at a 6.5 on value. I think this is a good whiskey that gives a pretty solid experience. It's just a little bit on the expensive side.
Mm-hmm. All right, Brad, that's bringing me out to a 38 out of 50. What are you coming out to?
Just under 40. I'm at a 39.5.
All right, so that takes us to a 38.75. Once again, I mean, it's approaching 40, and 40 is where we consider things like a no-brainer recommendation. Between 35 and 40 is like a less enthusiastic thumbs up, but still definitely a thumbs up. I would recommend this whiskey. It's good. It's just that, like, if you want to get a pour of it at the bar, this is going to cost you probably, what, $20 for a pour?
Yeah, at least like 15 to 18.
Yeah, you're just kind of starting to get into some territory where it's like, for the price, I think we could probably find things we like a little bit better than this one.
Yeah, 100%, man. And I'm not sitting here saying it's not a good whiskey. It is absolutely delicious. It's just the price here. The value's not quite right.
Mm-hmm.
But once again, Bob, we have drank a Rebel whiskey that just tastes delicious. And I will never stop singing the praises of Rebel.
Now, I think we do need to add the caveat to our score here. This is a single barrel. It could just be the barrel that we got that it's not quite hitting those extra decadent, sweet Rebel notes that we like. They do make a Rebel 10-year that is a batch, that's a blended version. And I think that I'd really like to try that one on the show, Brad, because I think that will be a little bit more in the sort of general flavor zone that we're used to. So, folks, if you're a fan of single barrels, I think this is like, you're not going to go wrong picking up a bottle of this. But in our specific case, it just fell a little bit too far outside of the general Rebel vibe for me.
Yeah, I think I'll recommend this.
Mm-hmm.
I think that you're getting yourself a solid whiskey, especially if you want to split it with a buddy, pay $50 each. I think this is a good purchase.
All right, man. We have drank our whiskey. Let's get back into talking about American Sniper. What do you say?
Let's get to it. All right, everybody, that was Rebel 10-Year Single Barrel, a whiskey that we are fans of, just wish it cost a little less.
Mm-hmm.
Just how Bob feels about war.
Big fan. I got to give it a 3 on the value score.
Yeah.
All right, man, it is time for us to get into our next segment, which we call Two Facts and a Falsehood.
Brad is gonna try to stump you, Bob, to all right and what is wrong. Two facts and a falsehood.
Two Facts and a Falsehood is the part of the show where Brad presents me with 3 items about the making of this movie, all of them presented as fact, one of which is completely made up by him. Brad, on the season, I believe I am at 15 and 11 right now. I'm slowly slipping back towards 500, and I do not like it.
Oh, I'm definitely with you. Really don't like it. I just want to see you succeed, Bob.
I'm sure you do, Brad. That's always been your motivation. All right, man. Hit me with your 2 facts and a falsehood.
Fact number 1. Pre-fact. The IMDb page for American Sniper is very strange because there's a lot of facts on there that are just kind of like weird things about Chris Kyle's life. So I'm just going to let you know, Bob, this was a difficult week, not to write the falsehood, but to find like decent
pertinent
facts about the making.
Yep.
Yeah. So I did my best.
Okay.
We'll see how it goes. Fact number 1, the clothes worn by Bradley Cooper whenever he was at home were Chris Kyle's actual clothes loaned to the studio by his family. The family was so grateful for Cooper's portrayal of Kyle that they gave him several items of clothing as a gift after the shooting was complete. Fact number 2, Chris Kyle met the how would you say it? I'll just read it as is, and then you'll understand my confusion. Chris Kyle met lone survivor from 2013's Marcus Luttrell during their Buds SEAL training and became close friends with him, although they graduated with different classes. Kept in contact often, and they remained friends for the remainder of Kyle's life. Specifically saying that Marcus Luttrell was the biopic
Subject.
Subject, thank you, of Lone Survivor. Fact number 3, Bradley Cooper used Chris Kyle's workout playlist as music to which to listen to while working out for the role. He also pinned a picture of Chris Kyle to his wall of his gym to always have his goal in front of him.
These are pretty good, Brad. I'm not going to lie. You did a good job rounding these up. I'm going to go ahead and assume that number 2 is true. You've been getting better at tricking me with these, so I could be completely wrong. But for the sake of argument, I'm going to say that 1 or 3 is the falsehood. So it's really a question of like, did they give the studio his clothes, and or does Bradley Cooper work out facing a picture of Chris Kyle?
Which one do you feel worse about not being true?
I want number 1 to be true. I think that's kind of cool. So I'll go ahead and say number 1 is true and say number 3 is false, with the caveat that I have absolutely no confidence in this one.
And you were right to not have confidence, Bob, because you were wrong.
What was the falsehood?
The number 1 was the falsehood.
Was it? Okay.
Yeah.
Nah.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot. They didn't even give him any clothes. Come on, man. The guy exclusively wore T-shirts. You couldn't give him one T-shirt?
That is that's true, man. They could have.
All right, man. Let's talk about the Bradley Cooper of it all. Cooper is a really interesting figure in Hollywood, especially in the 10 years since this movie has come out. So, you know, he was a member of the Actors Studio. He kind of made his bones in comedies. Like, I think one of the first times I remember seeing him outside of TV was in Wedding Crashers as the like huge douchebag boyfriend of Rachel McAdams. Then he does The Hangover and really blows up. But even in that movie, he's playing the douchebag of the group. Like he's just a self-centered prick. He has this sort of face that says, I am a self-centered prick. And he makes, you know, a couple movies with David O. Russell. He gets nominated for an Oscar, I believe, for American Hustle. And then he goes into this movie and he puts on like 40 pounds of muscle. And he takes on a completely different persona and demeanor for this film. And I have to say, man, of all of the Bradley Cooper performances, and I really like Bradley Cooper, and I think he's a very good actor.
Hey, Bob.
Go ahead.
Can you give me your favorite line of the 2000s that Bradley Cooper said?
Oh, it would be, do you ladies like peanut butter sandwiches? I'm pissed off he didn't say it in this movie.
I know, it's a very appropriate line.
He should have said it right before
film.
He shot Mustafa. Like, it should have been like an Arnold Schwarzenegger one-liner.
You like these peanut butter sandwiches? Bop!
You like peanut butter sandwiches? Poo, 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 poo. Okay, he actually shoots off 4 rounds, all through the eye.
I was like, man, that is impressive with the 50 cal.
This is his best performance in a movie. He is unbelievable in this film, Brad.
Bob, I've been waiting all day to talk about the fact that Bradley Cooper is a freaking revelation in this movie.
Unbelievable.
I don't know if there is a better war portrayal character ever done by an actor.
Mm-hmm.
He has so much nuance in being able to portray the exhilaration of war, the brokenness of what it asks you to do, and the level of PTSD and interiorness of a soldier who has come back from the war.
Yep.
It's just stunning how he juggles all of those different aspects of the role,
mm-hmm.
and it all comes across so clearly on the screen.
He does a believable Southern accent. He really put on the weight for the movie. I mean, like, so the physical things he's doing, yes. It never seems showy, and it never seems to be begging for an Oscar. And I think the worst Bradley Cooper performances, including this past year in Maestro, are like so nakedly begging for attention that it kind of seems embarrassing for him. and this is like the complete opposite of that. And I think maybe that's why this seems like such a revelation to me upon revisit, is like the last time I've seen Bradley Cooper was as Leonard Bernstein in Maestro. And this character couldn't be farther from that. But he so perfectly embodies, I don't want to just call him the strong silent type, but like he has a laid backness to him that really does reflect the culture of the South. But there's also the woundedness, the guardedness, what he's able to do with like a grunt or like a small little tick when someone finally gets to him. It says so much. It's a really restrained performance. And I think that Cooper, when he's criticized, it's because he's going too far in the other direction. And I'd like to see him do more of this, because this is it's really nuanced stuff, man.
Yeah, 100%. I am. This might sound weird, but like I'm thankful that we got to see Bradley Cooper do this, because in my mind, it puts him into an upper echelon of actors.
Mm-hmm.
And I just think that it's incredible. And a few years back, we were doing our director series, and we would rate the directors. I wish that this had been on the list for Eastwood. Because I think that the way he handles Cooper as an actor is really impressive here.
I do kind of wonder, Eastwood is famous for doing the first take is the take I use. I just wonder if maybe Bradley Cooper needs to be directed like that more often. I think when he's directing himself, like he did in Maestro, I think he micromanages himself to death a little bit. Like he wants to be perfect so bad that he ends up kind of getting lost in the sauce a little bit.
Ooh, is that a reference to Burnt?
Oh. Ooh, no, it's not. I've never seen that movie. Is that good?
Yes, I liked it. It's not perfect. There's a lot of issues. It's like a 7.5 to an 8.
Mm-hmm.
But literally everything you just said is the entire character he plays in Burnt. Like obsessed with perfection, gets lost in the sauce, doesn't know how to connect with other humans. That's great.
My favorite critique of a Bradley Cooper movie is in The Office, in the episode where they're all going to Gettysburg and they're watching movies on the tour bus, and someone says, after this, I'm going to turn on Limitless. And Phyllis goes, is that the one where the guy becomes limitless? Oh, man. Okay. So Bradley Cooper, we've gotten him out of the way. I do want to say this was an absolutely crazy year for actor performances at the Academy Awards, because this is the year that Michael Keaton and Eddie Redmayne were duking it out at the Oscars for Birdman and The Theory of Everything, respectively. And it just makes me even more mad that Eddie Redmayne won an Oscar. I think his performance in that movie is very good as Stephen Hawking. Michael Keaton gives one of my favorite performances of the century in Birdman.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it's unfair to Bradley Cooper because I do think I like Keaton just a little bit better in Birdman. But in any other year, I think both Michael Keaton and Bradley Cooper would be winning Oscars for those two performances.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just crazy to me that now Eddie Redmayne is the Oscar winner of the three.
Well, Bob, what do you have against Eddie Redmayne? Well, why do you hate the beloved soft-spoken British actor so much?
You know what's really funny is I don't. And he actually came under fire this past couple weeks because he gave a performance at the Tony Awards that Twitter just loved to make fun of. He's starring in the musical Cabaret right now. And man, my guy got raked over the coals. And I don't understand why people hate him so much. I just think that he's made really bad career choices ever since he won his Oscar. Like maybe he won it too young and it's like, how do I follow this up? And so he's done some bad work and he's been in some bad films. He seems like a good guy. And I think he's got the chops, but because he's never rebounded from winning that Oscar, I think the Oscar win is starting to look worse and worse as the years go on.
Bob, do you want to know a personal embarrassing story about me?
Always.
About halfway through college, I nearly joined. I auditioned for and received the role in a community stage performance of Cabaret.
Oh, interesting.
And I was set up to be one of the male dancers who had 10 lines in the whole show.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't do it, but I came close.
Why is that embarrassing?
male dancer in a in a stage production.
Are we embarrassed because you can't dance?
No, I can dance pretty solidly, Bob. We've you and I have both cut it up on the wedding dance floor a few times.
Yes, we have. We have done quite a two-step together.
I think it's not the idea of a man dancing. It was more of the male strip club cabaret dancer.
Got it.
That was slightly embarrassing.
Well, as you know, I've been trying to talk you into doing that on camera for an exclusive Patreon tier that we're going to introduce. $25 a month for Brad's OnlyFans channel. So now I just have more fuel to add to that fire.
I'm going to move on from that real
American
quick.
Sniper. Yeah.
American Sniper, everybody.
I want to talk about Eastwood here because it's pretty rare that we get Eastwood in action movie mode. And I don't think that he has the action chops of somebody like a Spielberg, where you like completely understand the geography of every space you're in.
Who was attached to direct this film?
He was. I don't know that that's necessarily Eastwood's intent either. The chaos of these hollowed out cities is kind of the point. And within, I don't understand where we are inside this building, but from shot to shot, he's not breaking the rules of like the 180-degree line. It's solid filmmaking. And I think when you couple it with the fact that Eastwood was like 82 when this movie came out, like the energy my guy was working with in creating this film, it's an impressive movie just on that front.
I think it captures the fog of war element of fighting in Iraq from what we understand it to have been like incredibly well. I think that's what I've started to really appreciate about war films is how they shoot the action. And I always come back to like a Sicario as one of the few examples of a, quote unquote war film. It's technically like the CIA killing people, but it captures the precision of the American military industrial complex really well. And yet here in American Sniper, I think you do capture the chaos of door-to-door fighting so incredibly well, along with one thing I appreciated is that he captures the boredom of being a sniper really well too. Like there's this element of like the guys walk up to tell him like, hey, you're good to come down now. And they're like, oh my God, it reeks up here. Like you clearly have been peeing in the corner. And also you covered our asses and got so many of us out of there alive. And once again, it's this tension between like the grossness of war and the honor of war.
All right, man, where do you want to go from here? We've got just a few minutes left before we get into our last couple segments. Is there anything else about the filmmaking that you think we should touch on?
He used Ennio Morricone at the end. And I freaking loved it, man. It was so good. It comes on and I'm like, oh, wow, they're playing oh, no. Oh, no, they're not playing taps. They're playing The Funeral. And I didn't know that they were going to use that. And I think it might be the best use of that song in a film. And I say that knowing it was written for a film, 40 years before.
I want to talk about the ending briefly because I don't know if I can actually articulate my feelings about it without sounding like callous. Like this is a real person who really died in a very tragic way. But every time I see this movie, there's two things that kind of strike me about the ending. It's a really abrupt ending. And because of its abruptness, I always assumed that Chris Kyle died like during the production of the movie. Because the ending feels so tacked on. Like he comes back from Iraq and he's readjusting, and then all of a sudden the movie's just like, boom, he died that day. And I think that A, it's really abrupt. B, it's a very respectful ending. Obviously, Eastwood has the tact and the class to not show this man be murdered at the end of the movie. But I do think that it just ends in such a way that's like fade out. He died that day. And then you get a shot of the funeral, which is real footage of his funeral procession. But I was expecting like maybe more words to come up on the screen, maybe Eastwood to let us sit with those images for a couple minutes, but it literally fades up on the funeral procession and says directed by Clint Eastwood. There is really no epilogue or epitaph or epigraph on this movie. It's just like he died, directed by Clint Eastwood. And I think that if he drops the ball anywhere, it's in that department. because while I respect how much respect he gave to his subject, you do kind of have a responsibility as a filmmaker to really land the plane at the end of the movie. And I know you said you were very emotional at the end of the film. I felt like, frankly, he should have milked it just a little bit more or a little bit longer with the images of the funeral before going to end credits. Or he should have put some more words up on the screen. Like something just feels missing from this ending for me. And for a movie that has not pulled any punches throughout the film in terms of implicating Kyle and interrogating Kyle's own psyche and his unwillingness to work on his trauma, that to just end that way, it puts a finality on it without really grappling with the implications of that. And I don't know, man. I don't know how to phrase it. It's too, I don't want to even call it stoic. It's just too much of a bow to put on a movie where it feels like he hadn't finished tying the bow yet. You know what I mean?
Yes. I think every single thing you are saying is 100% true. And I think that is representative of the life of Chris Kyle. Like to me, that's the point of the ending. Like, we didn't get to experience who Chris Kyle could have become. To me, it really brings you to a place of where his family must have been to say, we're proud of you. You're making progress. You're getting better. You're helping others. And yet it feels so disconcerting and discomforting and just broken to think that this upward trajectory, this beautiful life in the making, just completely is gone out of nowhere. And I've sat with enough families who have lost loved ones suddenly to know that feeling that you're feeling is real when you experience the loss of somebody before their time.
This movie wins an Oscar for sound editing or sound mixing. I don't know what they were calling it at the time. And I think that it is absolutely deserved. But what I really found fascinating were some of those moments where Eastwood's using both sound effects and the score to have this kind of eerie, discordant sound. The last time you get it in the movie is when the camera's on Sienna Miller's face at the end as she's closing the door, because she understands, like, there's something off about this guy that my husband's going off with. And I found that like a really interesting addition, because it's not only saying like she feels unease, because this is the musical cue for unease that we've used throughout the film. But it's almost like this idea of, throughout the movie, he's been on edge. He's constantly checking like the rearview mirror every time that they're driving to scope things out for threats. Whenever the dog is playing with his kid and he thinks the dog is a threat, these moments come up. And now it's not him who's feeling it. Like, he's finally let go of that feeling. And the last time anyone in the movie experiences that feeling, it's her. And I found that to really underscore the message of the movie, which is, to your point, Brad, the toll this takes on families in America. Because it's almost like this infectious disease, kind of like the sense of distrust and unease has almost passed from him to her at the end of the movie. And then you get the tragic kind of confirmation of that feeling of unease that she had proved to be true because her husband gets killed. I just think... Go ahead, sorry.
I think that the military throughout the entire film represents Chris Kyle's only blind spot. It's the only thing that he doesn't question, that he always believes in, that it's always the mission. It's always my brothers. It's always the people I need to save. And she is the one who always questions it, who says, hey, like, I'm all about, country and all that, but like, your family is here. And so he never sees the military for the threat that it is to his family, and she does. And I think that's kind of the element you get there at the end.
I 100% agree with you. I think both things are happening there, honestly. You're right. Like, it does portray the military as his blind spot. And again, I've been trying to underscore this the whole episode. Eastwood does a really good job of holding these things in tension. And I think that people on both sides of the aisle have really failed to grasp that tension when it comes to this movie. I think a lot of people went to this movie and supported it as the sort of rah-rah patriotic movie that it was accused of being. And that's obviously a bad faith reading of the movie. I think on the other side of things, the people that dismissed this movie as just, America, yeah, kind of movie are also 100% wrong. This is a movie that's much more interested in the toll that war takes on one life. And I think it tells that story more powerfully than The Hurt Locker, especially since this is ostensibly a true story. Brad, I think I'm ready to get into Let's Make It a Double, if you are.
We're near the end of the episode, so thanks for listening to the Film and Whiskey Show. Let's pair another film with this one, even if it's a struggle. It's our final segment of the day, now let's make it a double.
Yeah, I'm 100% ready, man. This movie is great, and everybody should watch it. And I think I've been really struggling with finding a movie that captures the psychological nuance of war quite in this way, because like you could pair it with an Apocalypse Now, but I don't know. That just vibes so much differently than this. I think I'm actually going to pair it with Saving Private Ryan. Because I think that movie, A, deserves to be watched. B, is incredibly made, similar to what I think American Sniper is incredibly made. And C, I think it dives into the mentality of the troops of their respective wars in a way that matters and helps us think about war as a whole.
Mm-hmm. I have a million different directions I could go. I just watched a new movie that came out a couple weeks ago called The Bike Riders. And that movie is freaking fantastic. It's one of my favorite films of the year. But it's also about like people who do dangerous, violent things as a way of covering up like the fact that they don't want to feel things. And so that's been on my mind a lot. I don't think I'm going to pair it with that, but I need a movie that kind of fits that mold. And I think for me, Brad, you mentioned how well this movie captures the boredom of being a sniper. And it threw me back to a movie that I haven't seen in almost 20 years. It's a movie by the director Sam Mendes, and it's called Jarhead. It has Jake Gyllenhaal in it as a guy who is training to become a Marine sniper. And it is all about the psychological toll that it takes on a person to have to wait months and months and months to take one shot, and what happens to you if you don't make that shot. I have no idea how that movie holds up. Like I said, I haven't seen it in 20 years. I might go ahead and make it a double tonight, Brad. Just watch Jarhead to see how that thing holds up. Yeah. But I think you could do it a lot worse.
You talked earlier about American Sniper having a great trailer. I have vivid memories of Jarhead. I don't even know the name of the song that plays in the trailer.
It was Jesus Walks by Kanye. I remember that trailer, dude.
Yep. Dude, tell me that's not just one of the greatest needle drops in a trailer ever.
It was such a good trailer that I was actively pissed off at the movie for I don't think it uses the song in the movie. And I was like, God bless it. Like, I came here for that song.
Yeah, 100%, man.
Maybe that's my Let's Make It a Double. Maybe I just want to pair this movie with Jesus Walks by Kanye.
Yeah, that's the move. 100%.
All right, dude, let's get into some final scores here. I'd like for you to go first, Brad. I've been talking a lot today, and it sounds like you might be even higher on this movie than I am.
Dude, I think this is one of the best war movies we have watched on this podcast. And we've watched quite a few, like all the way back from like Paths of Glory up through, I mean, American Sniper might be the most modern war movie as far as made the latest and, a war that is the most recent. I think I'm going to give this a 9.5.
Wow.
Like there are issues. Not all of the acting is perfect. There are, especially early in the movie, there's stuff that feels a little rushed and sloppy. But I think he lands the plane. And from about maybe 30 to 40 minutes into the end, and this is a 2 hour and 15 minute movie?
Yeah, somewhere in there.
Like for a solid almost 2 hours, this is incredible filmmaking, investigating the psyche of an American soldier. And I think it's great.
I think I'm actually going to come out significantly lower than you then, Brad. I think this movie is like, for 80% of its runtime, it's like an 8.5 to a 9 for me. It's really, really good, like you said. But the two bookends on either side of the movie are like everything when Chris Kyle is a kid is horrifically bad acting, like truly awful movie making and acting. And then I think the way this movie ends, it both loses a lot of steam and it feels like an anticlimax. And I understand, to your point, that that's probably part of the movie making, that his life felt anticlimactic because it was ripped away from him. I just think Eastwood has to do a little bit more there to earn an emotional payoff for what we've been watching for 2 hours and 15 minutes. I've been waffling between an 8 and an 8.5 on this movie. I think I'll give it an 8.5, Brad, but that's probably just because I am happy that you like it so much. And I don't want to hurt your feelings by giving it an 8. So I'll give it an 8.5. That brings us out to a 9 out of 10 on average. This is one of our highest rated movies of the year now, Brad.
Really? At a 9 out of 10?
Mm-hmm.
Man, it's almost
we've had a lot of 7s and 8s this year.
Yeah, but really fun 7s and 8s.
Yeah, and this is a 9, and it's probably the least fun movie we've done all season.
Oh, yeah. I will maybe watch this movie once or twice more in my life.
Yep.
It was so hard to watch.
Dude, looking ahead at the next few weeks, we've got 3 Star Wars movies and 2 MCU movies to end the season.
I want to put an asterisk. 3 Disney-produced Star Wars movies.
All that to say, maybe this does deserve an 8.5 just for being the last real movie we're going to watch for the rest of the season.
Thank you.
So it's a 9 out of 10 from us on American Sniper, but we'd like to know what you think. Reach out to us on social media. You can find us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, or YouTube at Film Whiskey.
Or you can join the Discord. We are on there every single day talking to you guys, fans of the Film and Whiskey podcast. So if you'd like to join the conversation, you can find a link at the end of every single one of our show notes.
Next week, we're kicking off the Disney Star Wars Renaissance, Brad, with The Force Awakens, J.J. Abrams' absolute turd of a film that I can't wait to watch again. All right, we'll see you next week for Force Awakens. But until then, I'm Bob Book.
I'm Brad G.
And we'll see you next time.